Dr. Emeka Okafor, the owner of a hospital group worth $400 million, decides to visit his hospitals in secret. Dressed like an ordinary person, he walks into one of his own hospitals. In the waiting room, he finds a young nurse crying quietly while still trying to do her work. "Sister, are you all right?" he asks, concerned. "I'm fine, sir," she replies, wiping her face quickly. "My mother needs surgery and I cannot afford to pay for it." Emeka is stunned. He already knows his staff don't earn what they should. But what he discovers later is far worse. The hospital administrator has been stealing the salaries of the nurses, the cleaners, the orderlies, every single person holding that hospital together. And when Emeka decides to step in, something happens that will change two lives forever. Hello friends. Welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments where are you watching from? Texas? Georgia? Maybe New York or California? We want to know. Dr. Emeka Okafor was 52 years old. By every measure the world uses to judge a man, he had made it. He was one of the most respected men in the healthcare business across the whole of Africa. His hospital group, Medcore Nigeria, brought in $400 million every single year. He had 11 hospitals across the country. 12,000 employees. His photograph had been on the cover of business magazines. A university had named a building after him. The president had shaken his hand. Dr. Emeka Okafor. The man who built the hospital empire from a single small clinic he borrowed money to open. That was the kind of thing people said about him at big dinners and important events while he smiled and shook hands and quietly thought about what to build next. But he had started with nothing. Truly nothing. At 26, he was a newly qualified doctor sleeping on a thin mattress in a tiny room at a government hospital. He watched patients lie on floors because there were not enough beds. He watched nurses work back-to-back shifts because there were not enough staff. He watched good medicine fail because there was simply not enough of everything. He worked inside that place for 3 years. Then one evening, a kind older doctor named Dr. Balogun sat across from him in the small staff canteen and said something that changed everything. Dr. Balogun leaned forward across the small canteen table, his voice low and certain, and told Emeka that the problem with healthcare was not a lack of doctors. It was a lack of people willing to build the kind of places that let doctors do their work properly. He told him to go and build those places. That was his purpose. Emeka had carried those words for many years. He had built the places. 11 of them. 12,000 employees. Hundreds of thousands of patients served every year. But somewhere along the way, between the board meetings and the big plans and the private flights and the large clean office, he had stopped walking the wards. He had stopped smelling the antiseptic. He had stopped knowing the names of the people whose hands actually held his hospitals together every single day. He had too many directors passing information to him before it arrived. Too many managers sending neat reports that said everything was fine. Too much distance between himself and what was actually happening inside his own hospitals. And that thought, on this particular Monday morning, was the one that finally made him do something about it. He told his driver to stop 4 streets away from one of his hospitals. It was the oldest one in the group. The numbers coming from it had been quietly bothering him for a while. Not in a big dramatic way. Just the slow, persistent feeling that something was not right. The way a photograph looks almost correct until you notice one small thing that should not be there. He changed in the back of the car. Plain dark trousers. A simple blue shirt. The kind of clothes any ordinary person visiting a sick relative might wear. He put his phone in a plain case. He took off his watch and locked it in the front of the car. He carried a folded newspaper under his arm. He turned to his 2 security men who had protected him for 9 years, and told them quietly but firmly to stay back. Far enough that no one would connect them to him. Close enough that they could reach him quickly if he called. They did not like this plan. They never did. But they had learned over many years that arguing with Emeka Okafor about a decision he had already made was a waste of time and energy. He walked the 4 streets alone and pushed through the front door of his hospital. The smell reached him before anything else did. A good hospital has a particular smell. A smell that tells you, without needing to look at anything, that the place is being properly looked after. It is not a nice smell exactly. But it is a reassuring one. This hospital did not smell like that. It smelled of something older and more neglected. A heaviness in the air that comes from places where the cleaning has been done too quickly, where small daily tasks have quietly been let go, where the basic discipline of keeping a medical building healthy has slowly stopped being anyone's priority. Emeka recognized that smell. He had worked in it for 3 years at 26. He had spent the years since building places that did not smell like it. He stood inside the front entrance and looked at the waiting area. The rows of plastic chairs were nearly full. Patients and their relatives sat in the particular stillness of people who have been waiting a long time and have accepted that they will wait even longer. A television on the wall played a news channel with the sound turned so low it was essentially just a moving picture. A ceiling fan turned slowly above the reception desk, moving the warm air without actually cooling anything. The reception desk had 2 people behind it. One was on a phone call, turned slightly away from the window, her voice too low to hear. The other was looking at a screen, clicking occasionally, not looking up at the 4 people standing patiently in front of her. Emeka joined the line. He waited. He counted. 11 minutes before anyone looked at him. Not helped. Not welcomed. Simply looked at and asked what he needed. He told the woman behind the desk that he was visiting a relative on one of the wards. She pointed in a direction rather than giving him proper directions. He thanked her. She had already looked back at her screen before he finished. He walked deeper into the hospital. He counted things as he moved. It was a habit from his early days, learned from Dr. Baligan, who said that counting forces you to truly see what you are otherwise inclined to walk past. 6 lights were out in the main corridor. Not flickering. Completely out. They left dark patches on the floor that made the hallway feel smaller than it was. A ceiling panel near one of the departments had a large water stain spreading across it in a brownish ring. 2 chairs in a side waiting area had cracked seats held together with packing tape. He turned into the corridor that led to the wards. The nurse's station at the entrance to one of the wards was empty. Not temporarily empty, the way a station looks when someone has stepped away for a moment. This was a settled, long-standing kind of empty. A clipboard hung on its hook. 3 empty paper cups sat on the desk. A medical cuff lay on the counter with no one near it. He kept walking. He passed through one of the main wards slowly, looking around the way a visiting relative would, searching for a face he recognized. What he saw instead were patients lying in beds arranged slightly too close together. The space between them was narrow enough that a nurse passing through would have to turn sideways. The beds were clean. The linen looked fresh. Someone was making that effort. But the walls had not been painted in a very long time. A window at the far end had a crack in it sealed with a strip of tape that had started to peel. He saw 7 nurses during his walk through the ward and the surrounding corridors. 4 of them moved with the urgent, focused energy of people trying to do 3 jobs at once because there were not enough of them to share the load. 2 were talking quietly near a supply room, not resting but speaking in the low, tight voices of people worried about something. The 7th was standing at a patient's bedside, checking a chart. She was careful. She was doing her job properly. But there was something in the way she held herself. A tiredness that went beyond the body. The kind that lives in the place where a person's motivation is kept. Their uniforms were clean and properly worn. All of them had made that effort. But their faces told a different story. These were not people who felt good about coming to work. These were people who were enduring it. Showing up because they were professional enough to show up. But running on something much thinner than what should have been there. Emeka felt something tighten in his chest. This was his hospital. These were his wards, his lights, his patients, his staff. And this was what they had become while he sat in a large office reading reports that described patient satisfaction as adequate and staff performance as acceptable. He took a slow breath and walked toward the area near the main nursing station at the end of the ward corridor. There was a small alcove there, slightly set back from the main flow of movement, where the corridor bent toward the stairwell. A trolley of medical supplies stood to one side. Against the wall, mostly in shadow, stood a young nurse. She was not on her phone. She was not resting. She was simply standing with her back to the wall, her arms wrapped around herself, and she was crying. Not loudly. Not in any way that filled the corridor or drew attention. It was the quiet kind of crying. The kind that happens when a person has been holding something very heavy for so long that the body simply begins to let it out on its own, whether the person wants it to or not. Her name badge read, Adaeze Nwosu RN. She was perhaps 28 or 30. Her uniform was clean and neat. Her hair was pinned carefully under her cap. Whatever this moment was costing her, she had not allowed it to touch her appearance. That small, fierce discipline, holding herself together on the outside while everything inside was slipping, was the thing that moved something in Emeka's chest that had not moved in a very long time. He walked toward her slowly so as not to startle her. She saw him coming and straightened immediately. Her arms dropped to her sides. She pressed her lips together and blinked quickly twice. She greeted him professionally, asked if he was looking for someone, her voice completely steady, reaching back for composure with both hands. He told her his name was Emeka, that he was not looking for a patient, that he had noticed her standing there and was not going to pretend he had not seen what he saw. He asked her simply and quietly if she was all right. Something moved in her face. The steadiness held, but around the edges of it something shifted, like the surface of still water when something has touched it from below. She told him she was fine. The way a person says something they have decided to believe whether it is true or not. He told her she did not look fine. He said it gently but plainly, the way Dr. Balogun used to speak to him. Patient. Unhurried. Meaning every word. Adaeze looked at him. Her jaw tightened slightly, then released. She looked down at the supply trolley beside her, as if organizing her thoughts alongside the rows of neatly arranged items on it. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, she told him about her mother. That she was here. In this hospital. That she needed surgery. That the doctors could do it. That it was not a complicated procedure. But that it required fees. Theater fees. Medication before and after. And that her salary had not come in 6 weeks. Every time she asked, she was told it was being processed. It was always being processed. She worked in this hospital. Her mother was a patient in this hospital. And she could not pay for her care. The space between them was quiet for a moment. Emeka asked her gently what her mother's name was. Adaeze looked at him, surprised by the question. She told him. Mama Ngozi. That was what everyone called her. Emeka nodded once. He asked how long her mother had been waiting for the procedure. 3 weeks, she told him. He looked at her steadily and told her not to go straight to her mother's ward after her shift. To come to the main entrance instead. He would be there. She frowned at him. Cautious. The careful caution of someone who has learned not to trust things that arrive unexpectedly and seem kind. She asked him why. He told her that a salary being 6 weeks late was not a processing delay, and that he intended to find out exactly what it was. He held her gaze long enough that she understood he meant it completely. Then he turned and walked back toward the main entrance. And as he pushed through the front doors into the bright morning outside, the tightening in his chest had become something colder and sharper. Something very much like the beginning of anger. Because Adaeze had said her salary was late again. Which meant this was not a mistake. This was a pattern. And patterns like this do not happen by accident. Emeka did not go far. There was a small shop selling cold drinks directly across the road from the hospital entrance. He bought a bottle of water he did not drink and called his head of finance, a careful and thorough man named Adaeze, who had worked for Medcore for many years and knew every number in the company the way a musician knows a song he has played 10,000 times. He kept his voice low and told Chukwuemeka he needed the salary records for the branch. All of them. Every staff member. On his phone. Right now. Chukwuemeka began to ask a question. Emeka told him simply and calmly that he needed them right now. The records arrived in 9 minutes. Emeka stood by the window of the small shop and read them the way he used to read patient files. Slowly. Carefully. Alert for the detail that did not belong. He had spent enough years building Medcore that salary documents felt as natural to read as a simple letter. He knew what healthy numbers looked like. He knew the shape of a correctly run payroll. He knew how the figures should sit and how they should line up with company rules. These figures did not look healthy. He went back to the beginning and read again. Medcore rules for a registered nurse at Adaeze level, with 3 years of service and full-time hours, were clear. The minimum monthly salary was set, written down, and could not be changed. Emeka himself had approved and signed those figures during a company-wide salary review. The number next to Adaeze Nwosu's name was less than half of that figure. He scrolled further. Another nurse. Another number. Also wrong. Also roughly half. He kept scrolling. Ward helpers. Cleaning staff. Laboratory workers. Pharmacy staff. Office clerks. His hand holding the phone went very still. He went back further in the records. 4 months back. 8 months back. Further. The pattern was there the entire time. Sitting quietly inside the records like something rotten hidden under clean wrapping. Every single employee at this hospital was being paid far less than company rules required. Not by a small amount. Not by a simple error. By almost exactly half. Month after month after month. And the full salaries were being recorded in the system as if they had been paid. The missing money was buried inside accounting labels that would be invisible to anyone who was not looking for them specifically and did not already know exactly where to look. Emeka set his phone face down on the counter. He stood very still. He thought about his 12,000 employees across 11 hospitals. 12,000 people who had come to work for his company because they trusted that what he had built was fair. People with sick mothers. People with children in school. People with rent to pay and food to buy and small important lives that depended on a salary arriving in full on the right day. At this hospital, for a very long time, someone had been cutting those salaries nearly in half and keeping the difference. He picked up his phone and made a second call. He asked Chukwemeka who the branch administrator was. Chukwemeka told him the name was Billionaire Adaeze. That he had been in the role for about 3.5 years. Emeka asked how long Billionaire had been in charge of the salary payments for the branch. After a moment Chukwemeka told him just under 3 years. Emeka did the calculation quickly in his head. It matched almost exactly with when the salary problems had begun. He thanked Chukwemeka and told him to say nothing about the call to anyone. He ended the call and looked back at the hospital entrance. Billionaire Adaeze. Branch administrator. 3 years of being in charge of salary payments. 3 years of helping himself to the wages of nurses and cleaners and orderlies and clerks. People who came to work every day and cared for sick human beings and held everything together with tired, underpaid hands. Not knowing that the money they had honestly earned was being quietly stolen before it ever reached them. Adaeze Nwosu had worked in that hospital for 3 years. Her mother was lying in a ward inside, waiting for a procedure her daughter could not pay for. Because the salary Adaeze had honestly worked for, every single month, had been quietly and deliberately cut nearly in half by the man sitting in the administrator's office. Emeka bought a second bottle of water he also did not drink. Then he called his company lawyer. He spent the next 2 hours in the back of his car with Chukwemeka on one phone and his lawyer, a sharp and thorough woman named Mrs. Folake Adewale, on the other. Together they built a full picture of exactly what Billionaire Adaeze had done, how he had done it, how long it had been going on, and what it had cost. Mrs. Adewale's voice stayed professionally calm throughout. But Emeka had worked with her long enough to hear what lived underneath that calm. She was very, very angry. The total amount taken from the employees of this hospital came to just under $340,000. $340,000. Taken in careful monthly portions from people who could not afford to lose a single cent of it. From nurses who worked night shifts and back-to-back shifts and holiday shifts. From cleaners who mopped floors before sunrise. From helpers who lifted and turned and bathed and cared for patients who could not care for themselves. From a young woman named Adaeze whose mother had been waiting 3 weeks for surgery she needed. Emeka heard the number and said nothing for a long moment. Then he told Mrs. Adewale to build the full file. Everything documented and solid. Ready to give to the authorities the moment he said so. She asked him when he wanted to move. Emeka looked out the car window at the hospital entrance. The afternoon light had begun to soften. A group of young nursing students in pale blue uniforms were walking in through the front doors, textbooks under their arms, talking quietly to each other. Young women beginning the same path Adaeze had started on 3 years ago. Coming to work in medicine because they believed it was a place where care was returned with care. He told her soon. But not yet. There was something he needed to do first. He ended the call and stepped out of the car, just as the front doors of the hospital opened and Adaeze walked out. She was moving with purpose, bag on her shoulder, the walk of someone who had somewhere urgent to be. She almost went past him entirely. Then something made her slow down and look up. She stopped. He raised one hand in a small, quiet gesture. She told him he had stayed. Her voice carrying surprise and something carefully guarded underneath it. He told her he had said he would. She looked at him carefully. The same weighing look she had given him in the alcove. Measuring the distance between what he appeared to be and what he might actually be. Then she asked him why. Instead of answering directly, Emeka suggested they walk. He told her there was a bench near the garden at the side of the building. That he wanted to tell her something before she went in to see her mother. And that if at any point she wanted him to stop and leave her alone, she only had to say so. He would respect that completely. She studied him for a moment longer. This ordinary-looking man in a plain blue shirt who had waited outside her hospital for hours and who spoke with the quiet certainty of someone who has decided what the right thing is and is simply doing it. Then she nodded. They sat on a low concrete bench near the garden at the side of the building, where a frangipani tree spread its branches over the paved ground and the afternoon air carried just a little of its smell. Emeka told her simply that he worked for the company. He did not say in what capacity, not yet. He told her he had been looking at the salary records for this hospital that afternoon. He told her that the numbers he found did not match what she and her colleagues were supposed to be paid. He told her this appeared to have been going on for a long time. He watched her face as he spoke. She did not look surprised. She looked like someone hearing a thing confirmed out loud that they had suspected for a long time but had not been able to prove, or had not been able to afford to say. She told him they knew. Not the amounts. But they knew something was wrong. They used to talk about it among themselves in the break room. They would calculate what they thought they should be earning, based on what their employment letters said when they were hired. The numbers never matched what arrived in their accounts. Her voice was steady but carrying something underneath it. The weight of something carried quietly for far too long. She told him that when they asked, they were told about deductions, government levies, pension adjustments, hospital development fees. There was always an explanation. Always a reason they could not easily argue against. And they were afraid of what would happen if they pushed too hard. Emeka told her he knew. And he meant it more deeply than she could yet understand. She was quiet for a moment. A bird moved in the tree above them. Somewhere inside the hospital, a door opened and a brief sound drifted out before disappearing again. Then she told him about her mother. That she had high blood pressure for many years. That she managed it mostly with medication and the kind of stubbornness her mother had in large amounts. A very small, very brief smile crossed her face. But it had caused a complication. A procedure that the doctors here could do. It was not rare or difficult for a team that knew what they were doing. She stopped. She told him about the fees. The medication before. The monitoring after. It all added up to an amount that should have been difficult but manageable on her salary. Should have been. Instead it had been impossible. 3 weeks her mother had been in that bed waiting. Every day she went in and held her hand and told her it was almost sordid. And her mother would look at her with eyes that saw everything and tell her she did not have to protect her. And she would say she knew. And then she would go and stand in a corridor somewhere and try to think of something she had not already tried. She looked at him. No performance in it. No reaching for sympathy. Just the plain, exhausted truth of a daughter who had run out of roads. Emeka was still for a moment. Then he stood up and told her to come with him. That before she went to her mother's ward there was one stop first. The hospital accounts office was a small room near the administrative side of the building. A tired-looking young man sat behind a desk stacked with paper files. Adaeze began to explain that her mother was in one of the wards. Her voice shifting into the careful, patient tone she had clearly used in this room before. Emeka spoke directly to the clerk. He asked for the patient's name and the total outstanding balance on her account. The clerk typed. The number that came up on the screen represented 3 weeks of waiting and 3 weeks of a daughter standing in corridors searching for a way through. Emeka handed over his card before Adaeze could speak. The clerk processed the payment with the mild, professional surprise of someone who has learned that unexpected things happen in hospital accounts offices and the right response is simply to process them correctly. The receipt printed. Adaeze stood beside Emeka and said nothing for a long moment. Her hands were at her sides. She was looking at the printed receipt on the desk with the expression of someone receiving something they have been searching for so long that the actual arrival of it takes a moment to feel real. She picked up the receipt. She held it. She turned to him. She asked him why. Just that one word. Carrying everything around it. He told her that her mother needed that procedure and she needed it now. That what had happened to her salary, what had been happening to every salary in this hospital, was wrong. That he would correct it. But that part would take longer than this afternoon. Tonight they would fix what they could fix tonight. Adaeze looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes filled, and when the tears came she let them fall, then pressed the back of her hand to her face and breathed slowly. She thanked him. Just those 2 words. Carrying everything inside them. Emeka nodded once. He told her to go and tell her mother she was having her procedure. The ward where Mama Ngozi lay was quieter than the others. The patients here were older, mostly, and the room had the particular stillness of people who have made peace with waiting. Emeka sat on a plastic chair outside the ward while Adaeze went in first. He sat with his hands in his lap and looked at the corridor around him. He was still in the plain shirt. Still carrying the folded newspaper. Still dressed like nobody in particular. Somewhere across the city his real life was running without him. A meeting had been moved. Several calls had not been returned. His assistant had sent messages he had not opened. He could not have cared less about any of it. He thought about Biodun Adeyemi. The man had been branch administrator for 3.5 years. Every morning for nearly 3 of those years he had walked into this hospital, past those nurses and cleaners and helpers in the corridors, perhaps nodded good morning to some of them, and then gone to his office and adjusted their salary payments. Adjusted. That was the clean word for it. The honest word was stolen. He had stolen from them every single month with the quiet confidence of a man who has found something that works and has decided that means it will keep working. The ward door opened. Adaeze stepped out into the corridor. Her face had changed. It still carried everything it had been carrying all day, all the tiredness, all the weight. But underneath the tiredness something else had come in. Something that looked like the particular relief of a person who has put down something very heavy. She told him her mother knew. That she had told her the fees were paid and the procedure was booked. She leaned against the wall beside the door. She told him her mother had cried. That she had not wanted to cry in front of her but she did. And then she sat up straight and asked for her reading glasses because she wanted to look at the place properly now that she knew she was staying. Something moved across Emeka's face. Not quite a smile but close to one. He told her her mother sounded like a remarkable woman. She told him her mother was impossible. Completely impossible. And the most remarkable person she had ever known. The warmth in her voice, the particular warmth that only comes when someone is talking about the person they love most. She moved away from the door and looked at him with the same careful attention she had brought to every moment of this long and unusual day. She told him he had said he worked for the company. For Medcorp. She asked him what exactly his role was. Emeka considered the question. Then he told her he would tell her everything. But not tonight. Tonight she should be with her mother. What he needed to ask of her could wait until tomorrow. She looked at him steadily. She told him he was going to ask her to do something. He told her he was. And that he wanted to be honest with her about what it involved. That there was a risk. Not a physical risk. The kind that comes from standing up against someone who holds power over your job. That he would not ask her to do anything he was not in a position to fully protect her from. But that he would not pretend to her that it was simple or easy. He did not believe in pretending things to people. Adaeze was quiet for a moment. A nurse passed them in the corridor, moving quickly with both hands full. She asked him if it was about Mr. Adeyemi. Emeka looked at her and asked what she knew about him. She told him enough. The word landed flat and certain. The word of someone who has thought about something from every angle and arrived at a clear conclusion. She told him they all did. That they had known for a long time that whatever was happening to their salaries had a source. That they did not have proof. And that they were afraid of what looking for proof would cost them. Some of them had people depending on them. They could not afford to lose their jobs. So they endured. They came to work and they endured and they counted what they had and they endured some more. She looked up. She told him she was still afraid. He told her he knew. She was quiet for a moment. Then she told him what her mother always said. That fear was not the enemy of courage. That fear and courage lived in the same house. Courage was just the one who opened the door. Emeka was still for a moment looking at her. He told her about the small restaurant around the corner from the main entrance. That he would be there at 8 o'clock before her shift. That he would tell her everything. And then she would decide. Whatever she decided he would respect it. She nodded once. Then she turned and went back through the ward door to her mother. Emeka walked to the far end of the corridor. He looked out the window at the evening settling across the city below, the lights coming on across rooftops, the sound of traffic that never fully stops. Then he made one more call. He told Chukwuemeka that tomorrow morning he needed access to the branch administrator's office records. Financial approvals. Internal messages. Everything connected to him. And that he needed a small recording device. Something that fits inside a pocket and draws no attention. There was a brief silence. Then Chukwuemeka asked him carefully if he was planning what he thought he was planning. Emeka told him almost certainly. Chukwuemeka told him he would have everything ready by 7:30. He ended the call. He looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Biodun Adeyemi was going home to whatever life nearly 3 years of stolen wages had built for him. He was probably comfortable. He was probably not thinking about the wards at all. Not thinking about Mom Ngozi. Not thinking about a young nurse standing in a corridor learning to cry without making a sound. He would be thinking about all of it very soon. The small restaurant around the corner from the hospital smelled of fresh bread and strong tea, and at 8 in the morning it was quiet enough that a conversation at a corner table could be held without effort. Adaeze arrived 2 minutes early. She was already in her uniform. Her posture had the quality Emeka had noticed the first time he saw her. That deliberate straightness. Not stiffness. Intention. The way a person stands when they have made a decision in the night and is honoring it in the morning. She sat across from him. He had ordered tea for both of them. She wrapped both hands around the cup and looked at him with a clear, direct attention that seemed to be simply how she looked at everything. She reminded him that he had said he would tell her everything. He told her he would. And he did. He started at the very beginning. Not with the phone calls or the salary records, but with the real beginning. The thin mattress in the on-call room. The patients on the floor. The nurses running on nothing. Dr. Balogun and the small canteen and the words that changed everything. The 3 years of working in a place where everything was not enough. The decision to build something different. 11 hospitals. 12,000 employees. His name on a university building. And then the large clean office and the neat reports and the salary figures that had been wrong for a very long time, sitting quietly inside the records while nurses stood in corridors and learned to cry without sound. He watched her face as he spoke. He did not rush any part of it. When he finished, the tea in front of Adaeze had gone cold. She sat with both hands still around the cup, looking at the table. Then she raised her eyes to his. "You own the hospital," she said. "Yes." "All of the hospitals." "Yes." She looked out through the restaurant window at the street, at the front entrance of the hospital visible not far away. The building where she had worked for 3 years, 5 days a week, 6 days sometimes, nights sometimes, through short staffing and equipment that was not good enough and an administrator who smiled pleasantly in the corridor while taking half of what he owed her every single month. Then she looked back at him and told him plainly that he had not known. Not an accusation. Not a pardon. Just the honest placing of a true thing between two people who were both looking at it. He told her no. He had not known. And that was his failure as much as anyone else's. She sat with this for a moment the way she sat with everything. Carefully and without hurry. Then she asked him what he needed her to do. Emeka leaned forward slightly. He told her that the salary records his team had put together were strong. But that a good lawyer could argue it was a system error. An accounting mistake. Something that happened on its own rather than something one person chose to do deliberately, month after month. He told her that what could not be argued away was a confession. That if Biodun Adeyemi said in his own words what he had been doing and how he did it, every door he could try to escape through would get closed. Adeeze's eyes were steady on his. She told him he wanted her to get that confession. He told her carefully that he wanted her to go to Biodun's office and make him believe she had figured out what had been happening and that she wanted a share of it. To tell him she had worked out the difference in the numbers. To make him feel she was not a danger to him but an opportunity. To make him comfortable enough to talk. He reached into his jacket and placed a small, flat device on the table between them. It was unremarkable. About the size of a button. He told her it recorded everything within a 10-foot area. That it had been running since he sat down. Adeeze looked at it. She did not touch it immediately. She told him Biodun would try to get rid of her. That the moment he thought she knew something that put him at risk he would find a reason to let her go. Emeka told her yes. That was likely. She told him she would lose her job. He told her for a short time only. That she had his word on that. That he was giving her his direct number right now. Not his office. Not his assistant. So that if anything happened between the moment she left that table and the moment he walked into that office, she would call him and he would be there. She looked at him for a long moment. She asked about her mother's procedure. That she needed to be there when it was done. He told her simply that she would be. That was not a question. She looked out the window. The morning was getting brighter. The street outside was filling with the sounds of a day beginning. Then she told him something her mother always said. That a person's true character was not what they did when things were easy. It was what they did when they were afraid and did the right thing anyway. She reached across the table and picked up the small device. She turned it once in her fingers. Then she closed her hand around it and told him to tell her what to say. Billionaire Adeyemi's office was at the end of the administrative corridor on the ground floor of the hospital, behind a door with his name and title on a small metal plate. The door was closed when Adaeze reached it. She knocked twice evenly and waited. A voice from inside told her to come in. The office was comfortable in a way that felt very deliberate. A large desk. A leather chair. A small refrigerator in the corner that was certainly not standard equipment. A framed print on the wall with words about leadership. 2 well-watered plants. The small, carefully chosen signs of a man who had made himself very much at home in a position he had decided belonged to him. Billionaire Adeyemi was in his mid-40s. A broad, open face. He looked up from his desk with the easy confidence of someone used to people coming through his door needing something from him. He greeted her by name with a tone that was neither warm nor unfriendly. Simply official. He asked what he could do for her. She closed the door behind her. She sat when he gestured for her to sit, and she placed her hands in her lap and looked at him directly. She told him she had been looking at her payslips for several months, that the deductions had never made sense to her, that she had checked the standard deduction amounts and gone through her employment terms carefully, and that what arrived in her account every month did not match what should be there. He responded smoothly and immediately. The answer of a man who had given it before and knew it well. He spoke about various adjustments applied at branch level. Tax contributions. Facility fees. Pension. She told him calmly and simply that she knew the standard amounts for all of those. That she had calculated them carefully. That even with all of them added together at the highest possible rate, the number she should be receiving was still much higher than what came to her account. Silence. Billionaire Adeyemi looked at her. She could feel the careful reading in that look. The experienced measuring of what kind of problem she was and how large. She kept her face open. Neutral. Not threatening. She dropped her voice just slightly, leaned forward just slightly, and told him she was not there to cause problems. She wanted to be very clear about that. She told him she was there because she was a practical person. That she had been in this hospital for 3 years and understood how things worked. And that she thought he was also a practical person. The silence between them stretched. Then, slowly, something shifted in Billionaire Adeyemi's face. The official blankness gave way to something else. Interest. And underneath the interest, something that looked almost like relief. The particular relief of a man who has been carrying a heavy secret alone and has just been unexpectedly offered company. He leaned back in his leather chair and told her she was smarter than he had given her credit for. Adaeze said nothing. She simply waited. And then Billionaire Adeyemi began to talk. He spoke the way people speak when they have been holding something alone for too long and have been waiting, without knowing it, for someone to share it with. He explained how he had found the gap in the salary system not long after he was given control of the branch payments. How the access he had been given allowed him to make small adjustments that were recorded in ways the main company reports did not automatically flag. How he had started with small amounts, then gradually increased them, watching each time for a response that never came. Because the staff were too afraid to ask clearly. Because the reports going up to the main office described everything as acceptable. Because the system, it turned out, had a gap in it that he had been quietly using for nearly 3 years. He told her the total amount with a flatness that meant he had counted it many times. He sat back when he finished, comfortable and settled, the way a man sits when he believes he is fully in control of the room and everyone in it. He asked her what kind of practical arrangement she had in mind. Adaeze looked at him across the desk. Then very quietly she told him she had something quite different in mind entirely. The door opened. Emeka did not knock. He walked in with the same unhurried certainty he had brought to every moment of the past 2 days and closed the door behind him. He had changed nothing about his appearance. He was still in the plain blue shirt. But something about the way he stood in that doorway made the plain blue shirt completely beside the point. There are people whose authority lives in what they wear. And there are people whose authority lives in what they are. Emeka Okafor was the second kind. He looked at Billionaire Adeyemi with an expression that was completely, quietly calm. Billionaire Adeyemi looked back at him. Confused first. Then something in his face began to shift. The slow, sinking recognition of a man whose mind is moving quickly through every possibility and finding none of them good. He asked who Emeka was. Emeka told him his name. That he was the founder and owner of Medcore Nigeria. He set his phone on the desk, screen facing up, showing his photograph and his credentials. He told him he owned this hospital, all 11 hospitals in the group, and that he had been standing in the corridor outside his office for the past 14 minutes. The color left Biodun Adeyemi's face all at once. Emeka reached into his jacket pocket and placed the small recording device on the desk beside the phone. He told him calmly that he also had a full recording of everything he had just said. That combined with nearly 3 years of salary records his finance and legal teams had spent the past day going through and documenting, what existed against him was not a suspicion or a guess. It was a complete and solid file, ready to be handed to the authorities the moment he gave the instruction. Biodun Adeyemi opened his mouth. Emeka told him simply that he had already explained everything, just now, to a witness. On that recording, the room was very still. Emeka looked at Biodun Adeyemi for one long level moment. Not with anger performed for effect. Not with satisfaction. With the flat, clear look of a man who has seen something broken and is in the process of fixing it. Then he turned to Adaeze, who was standing beside the desk with her hands at her sides and her face composed and still. She had the look of someone who has just done something that cost them a great deal and is now allowing themselves to feel the full weight of having done it. He told her she had done well. She let out a slow breath. Just one. The long, quiet release of something held tightly for a very long time. Outside the office, Emeka's security team was already in the corridor. Chukwemeka arrived 2 minutes later with a colleague from the legal team. Mrs. Adewale was on her phone as she came through the entrance, already moving to formally notify the authorities. Biodun Adeyemi read the document placed in front of him sitting down. He read it twice. When he looked up, whatever remained of his comfortable confidence had left the room entirely. He told Emeka he had rights. His voice had gone thin. Emeka told him he did. That the authorities who were on their way would make sure those rights were respected. He picked up the recording device from the desk and put it back in his jacket. Then he told him one thing clearly. That he was not doing this because he enjoyed it. He was doing it because there were people in this hospital who came to work every single day and gave their skill and their energy and their care to sick human beings, trusting that they would be paid honestly for it. People who went without things they needed. People who could not take care of the people they loved. People who stood in corridors and cried quietly because there was no private place to do it, and then went back to work anyway because they were good people and they were professionals. He paused. That was what this was about. Biodun Adeyemi said nothing. Emeka held the door open for Adaeze and they stepped out together into the corridor. The hospital did not stop. That was the thing Emeka noticed as they walked back through the administrative corridor and out onto the main floor. The work continued. Patients were being checked. Medication was being given. A nurse was moving slowly with an elderly patient down a corridor, one careful step at a time. The ordinary, essential work of a hospital, running on, indifferent to the fact that something important had just happened in the office at the end of the administrative wing. But the staff knew something had changed. Word moves in a hospital the way it moves in a small community. Through closeness. Through shared purpose. Through the fact that everyone working there cares about the same place. Emeka watched it happen as he walked. A look exchanged between two nurses near the medication trolley. A cleaner pausing with a mop to watch him pass. An office clerk sitting very still at her desk, holding a paper she was no longer reading. He stopped in the wide open area where the main corridor met the central nurses' station. The place with the most foot traffic. The place from which most of the hospital could be seen. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood. One by one, movement around him slowed. People paused. Faces turned. A nurse heading toward a ward stopped at the corridor entrance. Two orderlies stood still beside a linen trolley. The clerk came out from behind her station. He introduced himself. He told them his name was Dr. Emeka Okafor. That he was the founder and owner of Medcore Nigeria. That he owned this hospital and every other hospital in the group. That he had come into the building the previous day as an ordinary visitor because he needed to see with his own eyes what was actually happening there. And that what he found was not what should have been there. The corridor was silent. He told them the conditions they were working in were not acceptable. That the state of the building was not acceptable. And then he told them about their salaries. That for nearly 3 years, the salary this hospital owed them every month was not the amount reaching their accounts. That the branch administrator had been taking the difference. Stealing it. From nurses. From cleaners. From helpers. From every person in the building doing the real work of keeping it running. A sound moved through the people gathered around him. Not a gasp. Something older and heavier than that. The sound of a truth that has been suspected for a long time landing out loud. A woman near the back, one of the cleaning staff who had been with the hospital since its earliest days, said very quietly that God knew. Just those 2 words. But the way she said them held everything inside them. He told them every cent that was taken from them would be returned. In full. With extra added for the time they went without it. That payments would begin before the end of the week. That their salaries going forward would be corrected immediately to what they should always have been. He let that sit for a moment. He told them the person who did this was in the administrative office right now, waiting for the authorities to arrive. That he would not be returning to this hospital. The silence that followed was different from the first one. It was the silence of a long-held breath being carefully, slowly let go. Several people had their hands over their mouths. The cleaning woman near the back was not covering her mouth. She was looking upward with bright eyes. Then Emeka told them he was sorry. That he had not seen this sooner. That it was his failure. And that he would spend the time ahead making it right. It was the simplest thing he said. And it landed the deepest. He found Adaeze afterward near the entrance to her mother's ward. Not inside, just near the door, one hand resting lightly on the wall beside it, looking at the ward entranced the way a person looks at a room that holds something very precious to them. He asked her how she felt. She thought about it properly, the way she thought about everything. She told him it was like a noise that had been going on so long she had stopped hearing it had suddenly gone quiet. And that the quiet felt bigger than the noise ever did. Emeka understood that exactly. He told her he would like to talk to her about what came next. Not today. She had done more than enough today. But when she was ready. She looked at him and asked what comes next. He told her the kind that came with a different role. And a salary that was what it should actually be. She was quiet for a moment. Then she told him he did not owe her that. He told her he was not doing it because he owed it. He was doing it because in the past days she had shown more courage, more clear thinking, and more good character under pressure than most people he had paid very large salaries to for very many years. He said it plainly without any extra decoration. That he had built 11 hospitals. That what makes a hospital truly work is not the building or the equipment. It is the people who understand what a hospital is actually for. That she understood that. And that he was not willing to lose it. Adaeze looked at him. Something moved across her face. The slow, careful shift of a person who has spent a long time ready for the world to give less than it should, and is only now beginning to allow the possibility that it might give more. She asked about her mother's procedure. That she needed to be there. He told her she would be. That was fixed. Everything else moved around it. She looked at him a moment longer. Then she turned toward the ward door and told him to call her after. About what comes next. And she walked through the door to her mother. The week that followed was one of the most important of Emeka's career, and he had lived through many important weeks. The case against Biodun Adeyemi moved quickly. The recording, combined with nearly 3 years of salary records that had been carefully documented by the finance and legal teams, left very little space for argument. By the end of the week, formal charges had been filed with the authorities. Emeka did not attend any of the proceedings. He had said what he needed to say in that corridor office. What he focused on instead was everything inside the hospital that was in his power to fix directly and immediately. Every employee received a full individual breakdown within 3 days. The precise amount taken from them each month. The precise number of months it had gone on. And the total that was owed. The corrected amount, the full salary plus everything that had been taken plus an additional sum for the time they had gone without, was transferred directly into each account within 5 days. Every single one. A letter went with each payment, written by Emeka himself. Not drafted by a team and then signed but written. It explained what had happened and said clearly that the failure to have caught it sooner was also his own. He received many replies. He read every one of them. Several were long. Many were short. One, from the cleaning woman who had said God knows in the corridor, was a single sentence. Thank you for coming back to see us. He had it printed. He kept it on his desk. A full maintenance team arrived at the hospital the following week. They worked for several days. Every broken light in every corridor was replaced. The damaged ceiling panels were repaired properly. The ventilation system was fully serviced until the heavy, stale smell that had greeted him at the entrance was replaced with air that moved cleanly and freely. Equipment on the wards was checked and fixed. The staff break room was repainted. The small canteen was restocked with fresh food. Small things. But exactly the right small things. The kind that tell the people who work somewhere every day that they are worth the effort. He restructured the entire salary system across all 11 hospitals so that any differences between what was owed and what was paid would be automatically flagged to the main finance team, and could no longer be hidden inside smaller categories. He directed Chukwuemeka to run the same check across all the other hospitals in the network. 3 of them had similar problems. Smaller in size but present. He fixed all of them. He called Adaeze after the procedure was done. She answered quickly. He asked about Mama Ngozi first. She told him her mother was well. The procedure had gone exactly as the doctors said it would. That she was sitting up. That she was eating. That she had told the nurse that morning that the hospital food needed more pepper. A sound in her voice that was close to a laugh. Which meant she was completely herself. Emeka's face did the thing that lived close to a smile. He told her he was very glad to hear it. She reminded him that he had said to call. About what comes next. He told her he had thought carefully about this. That he had been thinking about the hospital and about the others in the network. And about the fact that what went wrong there was not only one dishonest man. It was a deeper problem. That the people at the top were too far from the people doing the actual work. And the people doing the actual work did not feel safe enough to speak. That there was no one in the middle who truly understood both of those things from the inside. He told her he needed someone who had stood at a patient's bedside and understood what that meant. Who had also walked into a difficult room and done a hard thing because it was right. Someone who knew what the hospital actually looked and felt like from the inside and was not afraid to say clearly what needed to be said to anyone who needed to hear it. He told her he was offering her a role. Head of patient and staff welfare for the hospital to begin with. A direct line to him. No layers between them. A salary that was what it should be. And a clear path forward with full training and support into a wider role across the whole network. That she would have real authority. Not advisory. Actual authority to raise concerns, to require action, to come directly to him with anything that needed to be heard. The silence stretched. She told him simply that she was a nurse. He told her she was a nurse. And also a person who had identified a wrong that had been going on for years, found the courage to act on it, carried out a very difficult task without a single mistake, and then asked only to be present when her mother came through surgery. That the nursing qualification took 3 years to earn. But the person she was had been building her whole life. That was what he was saying yes to. A longer silence. She told him her mother would want to give advice about everything she did in the new role. He told her her mother sounded like someone whose advice was worth hearing. Pause. Then quietly something that was unmistakably a small laugh. She asked him when she would start. He told her when she was ready. Not before. The changes at the hospital happened the way real changes always happen. Not in one large dramatic moment, but in the slow daily building of small things that add up over time to something completely new. Adaeze began by walking the wards. Every morning, before anything else, before any meeting or task or phone call, she walked. Every ward. The rehabilitation corridor. The outpatient waiting area. The children's section. Slowly. Looking at everything. Talking to people. She noticed what the data could not capture. The nurse on the overnight shift who was clearly running on nothing and needed someone to tell her that asking for support was not a weakness but good judgment. The helper in one of the wards whose equipment was barely working and needed replacing before it became a danger to a patient. The family in the outpatient area who had been sitting for 4 hours and had not been updated because everyone assumed someone else had spoken to them. She fixed each of these things. Not with drama. Simply and correctly. The staff trusted her with a trust that needed no persuasion, because they had watched her do something that none of them had been able to do, and they knew what it had cost her, and they knew she had done it anyway. Under her care the hospital changed. Not overnight. Not in a single gesture. Week by week, ward by ward, one small right thing at a time. Patients began to notice. A woman who had been admitted very unwell and spent several days in one of the wards told Adaeze on the day she was discharged that the hospital felt different from the last time she had been there as a patient. That it felt like someone was paying attention. Like someone actually cared whether things were done right. Adaeze thanked her and went back to work. Several months later, Emeka called her again. He told her he wanted her to come to the main office that week. That there was something he wanted to show her. She came on Friday. He met her in the lobby himself and walked her up to the boardroom, where the city stretched out through large windows in every direction. There was a folder on the table. He opened it himself. He told her that Medcore had 4 hospitals in the network that were not performing as they should. That the one she worked in was the first. That the other 3 had similar problems at their root. Not enough oversight from the ground level. Management that had been in place too long without being properly held to account. Staff who did not feel safe to speak and leadership that was too far away to hear them even when they tried. He told her he wanted to put one person across all 4 locations. Someone who understood the work from the ground up. Someone who understood what it took to walk into a difficult room and say a difficult true thing without flinching. Someone the staff would trust and that leadership would respect. Adaeze looked at the page. Then at him. She told him it was a very large role. He agreed that it was. She looked at the title at the top of the page. Network Director of Clinical Operations and Staff Welfare. 4 hospitals. Reporting directly to the owner. A salary that she read twice to make sure she had read it correctly. She was quiet for a long time. She told him her mother went back for her follow-up next month. He told her he knew. She told him her mother would want to know every detail of the new role. He told her to share every detail then. That he believed her mother's thoughts were worth having. Adaeze looked at him. Something in her expression changed slowly, the way something changes in a person who has been braced against the world for a very long time and is, carefully and cautiously, allowing themselves to stop. She asked him why he was doing all of this. He thought about it honestly before he answered. He told her about Dr. Balogun. About the canteen many years ago. About being told the problem was not a lack of doctors but a lack of people willing to build the kind of places that let doctors do their work properly. That he had built 11 places. And then stopped walking through them. Stopped seeing what was actually inside them. He looked at her across the table. He told her she had reminded him what they were built for. And that the people who remind you of the most important thing deserve to be somewhere they can keep doing it. Adaeze looked at him for a quiet moment. Then she reached across the table, turned the folder toward her, picked up the pen sitting beside it, and asked him to show her where to sign. On a quiet morning, many months after the day Dr. Emeka Okafor had first walked through the front doors of his hospital in a plain blue shirt with a folded newspaper under his arm, Adaeze Nwosu was doing her regular walkthrough of the building. She was dressed differently now. A dark blazer over a clean white blouse. Her Medcore badge on her lapel with her name and her title. She carried a tablet and a notebook and she moved through the hospital the way she had always moved through it. Noticing things. The supply levels in one of the medication rooms that needed updating before the weekend. A light fitting in the rehabilitation corridor that was beginning to flicker and needed to be dealt with before it became a problem. A young nurse at one of the ward stations who had been on her feet for many hours, and Adaeze stopped and told her to take 15 minutes and mean it. She was passing through the main outpatient waiting area on her way back toward the offices when she noticed an elderly man sitting alone in the far corner. He was perhaps 70 years old or a little older. He was neatly dressed in a traditional agbada of dark blue fabric, carefully pressed. His hands were folded in his lap. In front of him on the small table was a registration form, and he was looking at it with the quiet, dignified expression of someone for whom the form was presenting a difficulty. He looked up as Adaeze paused nearby. A mild, gentle embarrassment crossed his face. He apologized quietly for troubling her. He told her his eyes were not as strong as they used to be and that he could not read some of the words clearly. He gestured at the form. He mentioned that the young lady at the desk was very busy. Adaeze sat down in the chair beside him without a moment's hesitation. She went through the form with him line by line. His name was Pa Femi. He had come a long way. He was in his 80s. His grandson had been meant to bring him but had been caught in the traffic, which Pa Femi described with the gentle, philosophical acceptance of a man who has been navigating the roads of this country for many decades and has arrived at a kind of peace with them. She filled the form in for him carefully and completely. She walked him to the reception desk and made sure he was properly registered and that someone would be with him within 30 minutes. She brought him a cup of cold water from the cooler because the waiting area was warm and he had traveled a long way to get there. He held the water in both hands and looked at her. Then he told her simply and plainly that she was a good person. Not a pleasantry. A statement of something he had observed and found to be true. She told him they were just doing their job. He shook his head gently and told her no. That he had been in many hospitals. That not every person in a hospital did the job the way she had just done it. That she saw people. And that was not something you were trained to do. That was who you are. Adaeze looked at him for a moment. Then she patted his hand lightly once and stood. She told him his grandson would be there soon. And that he was in good hands. She walked back toward the offices. She did not notice, until she was almost at the corridor entrance, the man standing quietly near the main front doors. Emeka Okafor was in plain clothes, as he often was these days when he visited his hospitals. Not the deliberate, careful disguise of that first visit. Just ordinary clothes. A man in his hospital. He had arrived 20 minutes earlier and had been doing what he had taken to doing on his visits now. Not the hidden observation of a stranger, but the quiet, unhurried watching of someone who had learned that the most important things in his hospitals happen not in boardrooms but in waiting areas and corridors and beside beds. He had seen her sit down next to Pa Femi. He had watched her fill in the form, walk him to reception, and bring him water. She had not known he was there. She had not done it for anyone watching. She had done it because an elderly man was sitting alone and could not read a form and needed someone to sit beside him. And she was there. So she sat. Emeka stood near the front doors and looked at his hospital. Every light was working. The floors were clean. The air moved properly through every corridor. The staff at the reception desk were looking up at every person who approached them and speaking to them like they mattered. A porter was walking a patient's family toward the lift, talking to them as he walked, actually talking, not just moving them from one place to another. Two nurses crossed the waiting area with the focused, purposeful energy of people who feel that what they are doing is important and that the place they are doing it in supports them fully. He thought about a young nurse standing in an alcove on a Monday morning, crying without sound, her back straight, her uniform perfect, her hands still steady on her work, carrying something that should never have been placed on her alone. He thought about Mama Ngozi, sitting up in her hospital bed, asking for reading glasses so she could look properly at the place she was now actually staying in. He thought about Pa Femi holding a cup of cold water in both hands, saying you see people as a simple statement of fact. Dr. Emeka Okafor stood near the front entrance of his hospital on a quiet ordinary morning and felt, with a clarity he had not had in a very long time, that he truly knew what was happening inside Medcorp Nigeria. And it was good. He straightened his jacket. He nodded once to no one in particular. And he walked back out through the front doors into the bright morning outside. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you have learned. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. See you in my next video.